You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Well, let's get into a bit of the history of these people. You've done a great job tracing this back. How far back should we when looking at the origins of these groups?
Well, there have been different groups that have influence in history. The group that is currently on top of us, I would call them Judeo-Masonic. Now, when you think of the Jewish aspect of it, it is not an accusation against Jews.
Right.
I think most of the Jews are as bamboozled and mind controlled as everyone else, right?
Yes.
The way to describe it is it's an analogy to like the mafia, where it was Sicilian, and this was how the organization maintained secrecy, is by this racial component. But it wasn't the people of Sicily. They hated the mafia in general. They weren't getting any benefit from it at all. But this would be how I would call the Judeo part of it. The Masonic part is easier to talk about, because you don't have the concern of anti-Semitism. But it's certainly, I would say, at least till this century, was the most powerful part. So who are they? Well, basically they're the tectons. They're actually referenced in Josephus in the 1st century. They're builders and architects. It's a secret society, as I would trace it. And there is, not enough data to give you like complete citations, but we can look at basically what happened and draw kind of like as I was describing thought as creating logical context before. You can see that the Knights Templar would have come from the Messianic Jews who lost the struggle against Rome. The Templars would have been, I think they would have been described in the Dead Sea Scrolls as the builders. So they were, it was a secret society. They withdrew their public identity as Jews. They couldn't do that in the Roman Empire at this time. So they basically created an identity that could survive within the Roman Empire, and it was the Knights Templar. The origins of it is, who knows, the exact details, but it ends up with, there is a struggle going on between Catholicism and the Templars. You can see that the leader of the Templars, de Molay, is burned on the steps of Notre Dame. And then when the inversion of power occurred, the Masons then burned Notre Dame on the date commemorating his burning. So you can see who has taken control, over the time. Anyway, the Masons are also, because they're a secret society, they're hard to understand, but they're very ancient. They didn't begin in Scotland, though this was where you can kind of pick up the overt history. The Templars evidently had some agreement with Robert Bruce, the King of Scotland. You end up with the Scottish Freemasonry now, in the 17th century, becoming very powerful, 16th century. It's infiltrating the kind of the political life of Europe. And it's a secret society. No one, knows who's who except with their little handshakes and whatnot. But you end up, we could go into great detail, but you can end up, say, in general, in 1840 with Palmerston. Palmerston is a Grand Master Freemason, and he sets up what's called Palmerston's Zoo, which basically is simply the Freemason control of all of the political centers of power throughout Europe. They had agents everywhere. They had color revolutions and infiltrators. They were killing, the legitimate, kings of these areas. They're replacing everyone, and so at that time, Palmerston Zoo, which is really well documented. If people want to see the receipts on this, I would suggest the LaRouche scholars. They just did a fantastic job of exposing Palmerston and how how the Masons controlled Europe. And Palmerston now began Zionism. Okay, so Zionism was not a Jewish project. Again, we go back to the idea of like, well, you know, the Judeo-Masonic aspect of this. Palmerston began Zionism in 1840. He says, now is the time for the Jews to return to the homeland. Lord Palmerston, purported Christian, and of course, Freemason Grand Master and Prime Minister of England, he makes a declaration. The Jews reject it. The Jews actually had developed a religion that was called Reform Judaism, which had taken the position that Judaism should be a light, a moral adjunct for all humanity, okay? Just completely opposite of the Zionistic Judaism that, you know, is kind of in Israel today. So when Palmerston came out with his statement, Reform Jews organized against him, but they were swept aside, and actually their organization was subverted because Palmerston was representing the financial power of the British Empire. And they hired people to go into the congregations and basically over time broke down all of the idea of 1840, 1850, 1860. They broke down the idea of Judaism being something that the Gentiles could participate in, a overall moral force. And they returned to the ideas of like Deuteronomy with xenophobic and, you know, the promised land specifically. And so you have the proto-Zionists, as I call them, from 1840 to about 1880, set up the whole structure of what becomes Israel. I mean, I won't go into all the details, but they were working on the project all the time. They had survey after survey that were paid for by the Freemasons and the British royal family. Those were the two funding entities. They sent them to Palestine. And basically they were there, the surveys were there to try to figure out how to replace the Palestinians, how to set up, you know, the immigration of Jews into which areas so that they could have farmland and communications and things like this. So you finally got to Jewish Zionism around 1890 with Herzl. Now Herzl's an artificial figure of shill. He's an employee of the proto-Zionists, of the British Masonic order. I mean, he had a nickname in college of Tancred, which is a character in one of Disraeli's novels. Disraeli is one of the big Freemason promoters of the proto-Zionism. So you can see they basically, and his speeches were all just copies of Disraeli's speeches. So he's an employee of the proto-Zionists. He's there to hand over the project to Jews, right, who are now have been developed, and you start getting, you know, you get Ben-Gurion and Golda Meir and all these people. Well, anyway, this is simply a Masonic project which is related to their fixation on the rebuilding of the temple. Notice Hiram Abiff is their kind of central character. He was the builder of the first temple. So this is what you're dealing with, is a group who has taken an oath, and the oath is passed on through generations, is using Freemasonry as a cloak of secrecy. That is intent on reestablishing Israel as they define it, under their terms, to set up their temple. And they claim lineage, I'm sure, all the way back to Hiram Abiff. Even though I think if you did a DNA sample, you'd see that that's just a fantasy on their part. But nevertheless, this is how they view themselves. They view themselves as basically in opposition to Christianity, which was related to the group that defeated them in the first century. And they want to set up, this is why they call it a New World Order. If you want to see an example of their literature, I would suggest people read an analysis of The Tempest I did. You can just Google my last name, Atwill, and The Tempest. And you can see that I show that the play is actually anticipating basically Zionism and the creation of a Jewish world ruler. And people have always known, scholarship have always understood that the play is based on Isaiah.